Alrighty, so these are all heterozygous here. And so remember, if our genotype is heterozygous, that means we have a dominant and a recessive. We have a tall allele and a short allele. And so what will our plant's phenotype be if it has a dominant tall and a recessive short allele? What will the phenotype be? It will be tall. So this matches. And all these phenotypes would be tall. And so this explains why when we crossed the plants, they were all tall. Because even though it looked like the short plant didn't give any DNA to its offspring, it actually did. It was just the recessive allele of a gene. It was the recessive version of the gene. And so this gene was being dominated by the dominant version of the gene. So even though both of them are in each of these offspring, one of these alleles is going to dominate over the other. And the one that is more dominant every single time is tall. So it doesn't matter which parent it came from, the mother or the father. What matters is that inside this offspring, inside this baby, it has a tall allele and a short allele. And whichever one is more dominant is the one that we're going to see in the phenotype. So in this genotype, we see that the T is dominant. And so that means up here, T codes for tall. And so that means that this is going to be a tall phenotype plant. And we see that it was. Okay? And so this is where we're going to get into Punnett squares to understand this a little bit more in depth. But you're understanding all of these words. Sorry, we did talk about trait because the gene codes for a specific trait. So the trait here that we were looking at was height. And so that was the trait. The trait is a characteristic that is inherited. And so we're looking at the trait. The trait that we're looking at here is height. And we see that there are different alleles that code for height, for the gene of height. And, well, for the gene that codes for the trait of height. And one allele is dominant and the other one is recessive, and that's what matters. So if we look here, just real quick, I want to answer this question that we started off with. If we look here, when we cross these two siblings, these two sibling plants, brother and sister plants, when we crossed these plants, this will explain when we do Punnett squares why some of them were tall and why some of them were short. For the plants that were short, what had to have happened was that this plant gave its short allele over here, and this plant also gave its short allele over here. So these plants that ended up being short only had two of these short alleles. And because these were recessive, they only showed up when they were by themselves, short. But for the rest of these, they either had two tall alleles or one tall and one short allele. So they either had this or they had something like this from one parent. Either this one, let's say this one came from this plant and this one came from this plant, but they had received the other short allele. So this explains why their offspring would mostly be tall, but sometimes they would end up getting a short one. And we'll understand that more when we get into Punnett squares. But I just wanted to do this to show you the proper text, the proper words in the proper way. These are all of the vocab words used in their context, so hopefully that helped them make more sense to you as we get into Punnett squares.